Hello there. My name is Austin Carlson. It is the year 1788, and I am a delegate from my state's convention convened to consider approval of the proposed new federal constitution. I believe the new federal constitution does not effectively protect the states from unconstitutional rulings imposed by the federal government, and inherently does not allow for the equitable representation of the individual and smaller states within the federal system. In order to support this claim, I bring to you a direct quotation from Article 4 of the Constitution. This Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made, or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. To put it simply, this quotation means to state that any federal regulations imposed upon the state will be adhered to within the justice system, regardless of whether or not the state had any sort of say in the ratification of said legislation. By mandating the superiority of federal rulings over that of the states without accounting for the rights held by the individual, the federal system stands in opposition to individual freedom, which means that protection for the individual has to exist in order to make sure that the tyranny of the majority does not break through in the legislative process in America. Representation as imposed by the Virginia Plan is not a good example of equitable representation, as representatives in the bicameral representative branch are allotted on the basis of population. This allotment clearly favors states with large populations that dominate economically, and while it is good to pay attention to those states and make sure that their needs are met, smaller states like Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire still make up a significant portion of the United States, and in such need to be represented equitably and fairly. This brings me to the New Jersey Plan, which majorly delineated itself from the Virginia Plan in its implementation of a unicameral legislative branch with equal representation afforded to each state. And while I do love to see the compromise reached with the implementation of a Senate formed of 2 representatives from every state equitably, and the separation bicamerally into the House of Representatives, which allots on the basis of population, there is still nothing that accounts for the individual's protection from unconstitutional legislation pushed about by either house of the legislative branch. Now, as excited as I am about the conclusion reached between the New Jersey Plan and the Virginia Plan and the excellent compromise therein providing equitable representation within Senate and giving larger states the ability to swing their weight, if you will, within the House of Representatives, there still presents a very real issue of individual protection as outlined within the Constitution. So I'd like to call to your attention an article that was published a number of years ago, the Virginia Declaration of Rights, namely in 1776. And in section 14 of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, it states that the people have a right to uniform government and, therefore, that no government separate from or independent of the government of Virginia ought to be erected or established within the limits thereof. So to summate the points within Section 14 of the Virginia Declaration of Rights, it essentially states that no individual within a state government will be subject to another extended or separate or independent government within their own state. And the formation of a federal government will do exactly that, which is in clear violation of the rights proposed by the state of Virginia, which directly contradicts the imposition of a federal government as proposed by the Virginia Plan. This, again, does not account for the protection of the rights of the individual over tyrannical federal legislation, and in such is not effectively protecting the individual from the tyranny of the majority. Standing as the antithesis to the tyrannical imposition of federal legislation, the unicameral legislation imposed and suggested by the New Jersey Plan, which ensures equitable representation across all states regardless of population size, operates in a similar manner to the Electoral College, which stands to ensure that states with high population density or high voter turnout don't necessarily overcome states with lower populations or lower voter turnout, and in such essentially ensures the protection of the smaller states, which, is the objective of the government, to protect the individual. Otherwise, why would we want to pay taxes, And so if we're going to pay taxes and we're going to be all right with that, which again, is fine because it's representative and we're interested in paying taxes as long as we're actually seeing the effect of our taxes, wouldn't it also be safe to say that we'd like to see equitable treatment within the way that our legislature is formed on a federal level? And we'd like to see the weight of the vote maintaining its impact and maintaining its strength across the years of this great country's history. And as it will continue to advance into the future, we'd like to see perhaps that a lot of people would still feel the power of the vote and think that, their voice matters. And essentially to do that, there's got to be equitable representation and protection from tyranny in the Constitution. And that just doesn't exist at this current new federal Constitution point in 1788. Now, if someone were in some way to propose a judgment system by which the supposed legislation that might be considered unconstitutional could be judged as to whether or not it was unconstitutional, then there might be less resistance to the imposition of federal legislation on state governments. However, the act of imposing one's will upon anyone else is inherently tyrannical and wrong. And standing on that assumption, I have to say that regardless of whether or not there is a judgment system in place to determine the legitimacy or the constitutionality of imposed legislation, regardless of whether or not it's reached out of a unicameral or a bicameral or an equitable or a population-based legislative body, to impose it upon someone else without directly seeking their permission or directly putting it to the due democratic process of a vote is inherently un-American, and I don't stand by it. And in such, I don't stand with the ratification of this new federal constitution, because explicit laws ensuring protection from unconstitutional rulings must be ratified and cast in order to ensure a concrete foundation by which those disenfranchised from the federal process can draw criticism and hope to impose change within their system. Thank you.